Just another kiss and tell book about a chaotic White House? Or are we looking at the bellwether of a United States that's bitterly divided over its role in the world? Hello, everyone. I'm François Picard. This is the France 24 debate. We're talking about John Bolton's book, which is available in stores this Tuesday. At first glance, the vitriol surrounding it makes it sound like little more than the sequel to Fire and Fury, the 2018 chronicle of Donald Trump's election and first months in office. Now comes the contention that Trump is not a conservative Republican. It comes from a 71-year-old Cold Warrior who was George W. Bush's hawkish UN ambassador after the invasion of Iraq. The policies espoused by Bolton contrast sharply with the isolationist worldview of his former boss, and their differences over Russia, China, North Korea, and Afghanistan, just to name a few. Now, though, we're no longer in 2018, but in an election year, with a U.S. president who's flagging in the polls and who's announced he's shutting the borders to foreign students and guest workers. Is the United States now closed to the rest of the world? And even if, as John Bolton wishes, Trump goes down in history as a one-term president, will it ever reopen the way it was before? Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at the ideological divides surrounding John Bolton's book and the U.S.'s place in the world. With us, retired U.S. Ambassador Avis Bolin, former U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for Arms Control. Your boss at the time, who was it?
When the Bush administration came in, Bolton was named to the position of Undersecretary for International Security, and so he was my boss.
All right, well, we'll talk about that more in a moment. We'll find out if you two sat together at the State Department cafeteria. Walid Fares, political scientist, former Donald Trump foreign policy advisor to other Republicans candidates for president. Thank you again for joining us here in the France 24 debate.
Thank you very much for having me.
And also in Washington, he's White House reporter and covers all matters inside the Beltway for Politico. Daniel Lippman, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation on Facebook and on Twitter. The hashtag is F24debate. 6 million people tuned in on Sunday to watch John Bolton's interview with U.S. television network ABC. As Delana D'Souza reports, he did not hold back.
Despite multiple efforts to keep it off the shelves, the room where it happened is hitting bookstores. According to its author, the former national security advisor fired by Donald Trump, it's a book of facts. In an exclusive interview with ABC News' Martha Raddatz, John Bolton says his book demonstrates Trump isn't the decisive president he claims to be. Bolton writes that Donald Trump lacked basic knowledge, including not knowing the United Kingdom was a nuclear power. He says when it came to issues of foreign policy, Trump's ego was at play.
Longer-term considerations fell by the wayside. There was considerable emphasis on the photo opportunity and the press reaction to it, and little or no focus on what such meetings did for the bargaining position of the United States.
One of the most damning allegations the book makes is that Donald Trump pleaded with his Chinese counterpart for help in securing his re-election.
He focused on terms like China buying more agricultural products, which he said to Xi Jinping directly would help him in the farm states. A really, to me, stunning statement by a president.
According to Bolton, Donald Trump didn't only politicize foreign policy in his dealings with China. He alleges Trump was bargaining with the Ukrainians to set up a probe of the former vice president using the resources of the federal government. Last year, House Democrats impeached the U.S. president for withholding foreign aid to Ukraine. Bolton alleges impeachment malpractice was committed and suggested his testimony at the time would have made no difference.
As minds were made up on Capitol Hill.
But you're also saying, had they looked at, it was too narrow. They were just looking at Ukraine, and they should have looked at all these things that you're outlining in the book. If they didn't know about those things from you, how could they do that?
Because an impeachment process that was serious and not partisan, like Watergate, would have taken the time to cover all these areas.
John Bolton says he hopes history will remember Donald Trump as the one-term president who didn't irrevertibly plunge the United States into a downward spiral. However, the foreign policy hawk says that while Trump has an unwillingness to learn, when it comes to his re-election, the president's attention span is infinite.
Daniel Lippman, what have you learned from this book?
What I learned was just how damning an account this has been, because you really don't see in American history such a tell-all book. This is kind of the tell-all of tell-alls, where this is a common practice that Trump likes to link his re-election hopes to foreign policy matters. And so we have no idea what he's saying to foreign leaders now. They've really clamped down on the conversations that he has, trying to limit aides in the room. He has done a lot of retaliation of people who had testified from his government in the impeachment probe. And so every book has nuggets of information that is embarrassing to Trump, but it's also a question of whether American voters will care, because most Americans know that he is not someone who pays attention to all the details of foreign policy, and they know that he's a very transactional person and president. And so this only confirms that, but it doesn't change his base's view of him.
And does that explanation that we heard in the report of why he did not testify at Donald Trump's impeachment proceedings, which were squarely focused on Ukraine, do they hold up, Daniel?
Not really, because the real reason he doesn't talk about that is that he wanted to save this all for a book, so he could make millions of dollars and have a major splash of publicity this week. And the book wasn't ready when Trump was getting impeached. And so, and I think Bolton also wants to keep his future in Republican politics. And so it's kind of a bold move to go very anti-Trump now, but he also didn't want to be a tool of the Democratic impeachment effort several months ago. But I don't think that, Bolton is a very unpopular figure in Washington these days among both Democrats and Republicans.
Avis Bolin, the book is called What Happened in the Room. For some of what we're talking about, he wasn't in the room, though.
Well, it depends on the meeting, but if there was nobody with the president, that would be very unusual. And after all, he was head of a staff of people. I think I don't think his sources can really be called into question. And I think he knew what risks he was taking with this book. And so I doubt that the fact that he wasn't in the room really sheds any doubt on what he said happened.
What
and he
would
was
his
in a lot of
testimony
the
have
meetings.
brought now, when you look back, to the impeachment inquiry?
I think to those who thought the president should be impeached and convicted, he would have just confirmed all the things that we know about Donald Trump, as Daniel was saying, that the lack of any strategy, the lack of any his inattention, his fondness for trying to make deals, et cetera, et cetera. It would have just confirmed, and it certainly confirmed all the allegations about Ukraine from probably the most credible witness they could have found. Would it have changed any minds? I doubt it. I think the Republicans were absolutely cemented together in their support of Donald Trump, and I don't think they were ever at that point going to vote to convict him. So one can reproach Bolton for not coming forward sooner just because he wanted to make money. It's not a particularly honorable position, but would it have made any difference? No, I don't believe so.
And is it, well, in the court of public opinion, as Daniel was saying, kind of the same as when Fire and Fury came out? We're just adding nuggets to other accounts we've already heard.
I think this is a much more credible account. Fire and Fury was somebody who was, after all, just kind of sitting around on sofas in the hallway and picking up nuggets here and there. But Bolton was definitely there in the room. And as I said, he's a very precise person, I think he would have, what he says is totally credible. And it doesn't really tell us anything new about Trump, because I think we know everything there is to know about his manner of operating. And every time you think he can't sink any lower, he finds another way to go down. But this just confirms it from a very credible source. And I think, is it going to change any minds? Probably not, because those who think Donald Trump is not fit to be president already think that, and this will just confirm all the ways in which he is not fit to be president, in which he is really damaging the U.S. national interests and across a wide spectrum of issues.
Walid Fares, when you think back to April of 2018, the day Donald Trump announces that John Bolton was going to be his new national security advisor, at the time, what did you think?
Well, let me first begin by saying I have known Ambassador Bolton since 2004, worked with him on a couple UN resolutions, and of course when he became at his position at the UN. So it's a long period of time. I kind of know what is his long-range strategic thinking, and of course since 2016, since I became an advisor to President Trump, candidate Trump at the time. So I'd like to present it from the inside relationship between the two types of thinking. In 2018, to answer your question, I was very surprised that this could last long, because from the initial moment, Ambassador Bolton had a view which eventually, as I learned before that, was going to clash with the president's view. And when I say the President Trump, I'm not just talking about the person of the president. As it was mentioned earlier, he is very transactional. So he accepts ideas, rejects ideas, look at the transaction behind it. But there are other advisors in the White House. And the real clash, in my view, or the real misunderstanding or disagreement is not just between Ambassador Bolton and the president. It's really between Bolton and other advisors, and the president decided to take the side of other advisors. So in terms of foreign policy, we all knew, that Bolton had a view that is very specific.
Who are these other advisors, Walid? Because you take a dossier that you know well, Iran. You'd think that John Bolton and Mike Pompeo would be closer together. The U.S. Secretary of State has similar views to that of John Bolton, very hawkish. So who's the advisors with whom he might clash on this?
I may not go into the details of it, but I can shed some light. For example, the Pentagon in general has its own military strategy, which is containment, which is making sure that there is a balance of power, a delicate situation. And then you have probably Mr. Bolton, who wants more action on Iran. Remember the incident of the drone that was downed by the Iranians. And then the president came and said, I don't want to answer. It was not just President Trump saying, I don't want to answer. He consulted with generals, with other advisors. The issue, of course, of what's happening in Iraq, the issue with North Korea. So there was this contradiction between the platform that John Bolton wanted to push, and he was successful to a certain point. And then, of course, everybody else, including the Pentagon, including maybe the State Department, you mentioned Pompeo and Bolton, yes, they saw eye to eye on many things, but it's to what level you're going to go. Pompeo remained in the level of sanctions. Bolton wanted to go further. So it is also an issue of long-term strategic choices.
Does it boil down to hawks versus isolationists?
That used to be the case. If you want to stereotype it, yes, you could say that, but it's not as it is right now, in my view. It is two types of plans. For example, the president didn't want to take, and his camp, of course, any action with regard to Iran before the elections. Because if you start an action now, let's say a few months or 1 year, you will have to be engaged, and you don't know how this confrontation is going to lead you to a few months away from the elections. Versus Ambassador Bolton, who was, from his own perspective, saying, if we don't take that action, that the Iranians will take advantage and take action. So it was a lot of calculations and different views on how to deal with foreign policy. Iran is just one example.
Daniel, for us watching from abroad, explain to us right now, where's the pendulum lie when you have Trump on one hand, Bolton on the other, and Mike Pompeo in the middle. What does it look like?
So right now we actually have a new national security advisor from several months, or he's been there for a while, Robert O'Brien, who replaced John Bolton. He's actually not mentioned in the in Bolton's book. But Trump has kind of disengaged a little bit on foreign policy. It's hard to host leaders for summits at the White House during the age of coronavirus. We're getting the first leader visit, from the Polish leader right before his elections, which
let's talk about that. Andrzej Duda expected at the White House on Wednesday, first foreign leader since the coronavirus pandemic, and he's going to be welcomed by Donald Trump 4 days before Poland hosts a presidential election. They're hoping it's going to be a big shot in the arm for his chances. The conservative nationalists there, who are well perceived by Trump, since we're expecting, Daniel, for Trump to announce 1,000 extra troops just as the same time as the U.S. is drawing down its presence in Germany. So you say foreign policy is a little bit on the back burner. It doesn't seem to be with that visit by Andrzej Duda.
Yeah, I think this is an exception. But Trump is trying to, and his advisors are trying to get him engaged more on his campaign because they see him as flagging the polls where he could easily lose re-election to Joe Biden. And there isn't a ton of movement on foreign policy generally. Iran, we really don't have much insight, and it doesn't look like we're going to get any meetings between the Iranians and President Trump anytime soon. North Korea, he was not able to get North Korea to get rid of its nuclear weapons. They only seem to be more provocative these days. There's trouble in the Afghan peace deal. And so Trump is kind of focused on wallowing in self-pity these days, not on pursuing foreign policy, the foreign policy agenda, which most Americans don't care. They don't vote based on foreign policy. This is more of a Washington, D.C. think tank thing.
Walid Fares, that drawdown of U.S. troops from Germany, what's it about?
Well, basically, it is about many, many months of discussion, again, between the various national security agencies, advisors, the Pentagon, on the one hand, making sure that the eastern flank of NATO is reinforced in Poland on the one hand, a message definitely to Germany, but also it could have an impact on domestic affairs in terms of perception. Remember, Poland, there are a lot of Polish Americans. The visit that you just mentioned could also play a role in this. So there is no just one move that would be only in one dimension. It's always multidimensional. And obviously, the president is going to make a speech on this move, and therefore that could affect our perception of NATO, relationship with Poland, therefore the communities here, and all what could impact our politics as well.
Avis Bolin, when you look at the troop numbers, 1,000 going into Poland, perhaps at least 6,000 coming out of Germany, is it the end of the United States as the keeper of the peace in Europe?
Well, I don't think so. I mean, just the fact that we have the troops there is proof of the contrary. And unless we withdrew all our troops, I think that would continue to be the case.
Are those troops in Germany an anachronism?
Much of the Cold War. Well, personally, I would say I don't see that the defense of Germany requires as many as were there during the Cold War. And of course, they're not as many, but Germany, having troops in Germany has been important as a forward base for, and that's why the boys in the military want to keep them there. And that, it seems to me, is a much more questionable proposition than the need to defend our allies.
Daniel, you're saying the U.S. is squarely focused on domestic matters at this particular point in time. Again, seen from here in Europe, there's a sense that it's no longer going to be the same United States we've seen since the end of the Second World War. This is the week where we're marking the 75th anniversary of the United Nations. And the United States isn't willing to play the role it was playing around the world anymore.
Yeah, President Trump is definitely an isolationist, and he doesn't seem to understand the value of alliances. And so that is very troubling for many allies. And he is trying to refocus to Asia, with China as a big threat. We want to kind of bolster our position in Asia to counter China and its influence. And so he doesn't really see why we have tens of thousands of troops in Germany in the first place. And so that's one reason why he is eager to pull out. But I think his advisors have definitely limited the damage. Where if it was up to Trump, he would probably have 0 troops in Germany. But the Pentagon and Mike Pompeo tell him we have to keep a good number of troops there as a forward operating base.
Avis Bolin, are we making a mistake in focusing too squarely on Donald Trump and not on the broader mood of the United States that's tired of foreign campaigns?
I think both are important. I think Trump certainly captured part of the national desire to bring the troops home and be free of entanglements and wars and so on. But I think it would not have been as damaging without Trump as it has been. I think also that certainly the Trump administration will mark a watershed in our relations with Europe. I would hope that a new administration could really put things back on a track where we're at least really talking to each other. But I think certainly...
Is that possible, though? Is that possible? Or is the United States today too bitterly divided? There'll never be agreement. You won't be able to bring the citizenry together after this election and get them to agree on a common position looking at the rest of the world.
America was bitterly divided before Trump. He really just reflected that division. He has exacerbated it, but he did not create it. If we think to the last years of the Obama administration, or even back to Clinton, this is a polarization that has been growing for a number of years. And I think those who supported Trump would certainly support less foreign involvement, and that is not inconsequential. The other half of the country that thinks we should remain involved, that we have a unique sort of international responsibility, and we need to exercise leadership on many. They listen to that sentiment on the part of half of Americans. So yes, there's probably it will be different, but and I think the time is certainly ripe for relooking at the whole post-war structure that we still have, and that has really not changed in that much as far as our relations with the Europeans is concerned. But I think it would be much closer to what came before under a Biden administration, let's say. The Europeans would be certainly reassured by having somebody familiar with whom they can converse. I think the problem with the Trump administration has been it's very difficult to communicate, and it's not just Trump. There are a lot of people around him.
All right, let me bring in at this point Walid Fares. Walid, you heard there Avis Bolin mentioned successive administrations. There have been pendulum swings over the last 30 years in U.S. politics. Different people bring in different administrations when it comes to dealings with the rest of the world. But it's never been this exacerbated, the mood in the United States. And so the next U.S. president, will the changing of the guard be as seamless as it's been up to now?
Look, with regard to foreign policy, what I've learned over the past 30 years, that's since the collapse of the Soviet Union, is that the American public has the two sentiments at the same time. It's like H2O for water. On the one hand, everybody's tired from having our troops and spending on them and wars. But a president, any president, could inflame and mobilize a public for a cause. I mean, we remember how President Obama mobilized the American public to withdraw from Iraq. We don't want to be involved there. And at the same time, waged a campaign to bring down Gaddafi in Libya. Same goes with Donald Trump. He, in Syria, for example, said, we are going to be withdrawing, but then when the Kurds were fighting ISIS, we are going to be supporting them. When it comes to Germany, really, it's up to the leader who is raising that issue, because let's not forget at the end of the day that the strategic positioning of the US since the Cold War has changed. I mean, we had those troops, American troops in Germany, because they were in Western Germany facing the Soviets in Eastern Germany. Then the Soviets collapsed and we kept those forces. But the Pentagon, the various Pentagon leadership used them not anymore to contain a Soviets, because if you want to do it, you have to be in Poland, you have to be in the Baltics. But they use them basically as basis to transfer forces into the Middle East, into Asia, into Africa. The change of nature of our forces that can be deployed in 72 hours from any point around the world is now impacting the decision of maintaining large troops in one specific country. We have them in Iraq, for example, because we're containing Iran, but there's no logic of maintaining American forces in Iraq when the issue is resolved with Iran. So I think, yes, any president, should it be Trump, Obama, or Bush, or before him, can make a case for either sending those forces, maintaining them, or bringing them back home. And I agree with one thing in conclusion, that the country is divided, not just under President Trump, but all the way probably since the end of the Cold War. Things have changed tremendously for many, many reasons.
All right, you said earlier how you've dealt personally, John Bolton. Is he an anachronism? Is he a man of the past?
He is a man of the past because he has been there for many, many years and many administrations, but so are all those who have been involved in many decades, including President Trump was not a politician, he was a businessman, but he also come from a different century. So does
I'm asking about his worldview of John Bolton's worldview, his hawkish worldview. Is it anachronistic?
It is the same worldview that he has. So when the president shows him, he knew exactly who he was selecting. It's John Bolton basically is a man of the containment world. And he sees those forces such as Iran, North Korea, Russia, and others as forces that needs to be contained, versus the president who accepts containment, but when he sees a window for a transaction, he rushes into it. That's the reason for the clash between the two politicians.
So is Bolton intransigent or is he open-minded?
He can be flexible, but basically what he wants is to achieve a goal, meaning his map is, if the North Koreans give us enough, then we can strike a deal with them. But if they don't, we're not going to be waiting for them. We need to do more pressure. So he's for constant pressure until the other side would make a concession.
Avis Bowen, does that depiction of John Bolton ring true to you?
Yes, I think he's very single-minded. I think I would disagree about his willingness to do a deal with North Korea or Iran on any terms other than what the North Koreans or the Iranians would find insulting and unacceptable. He has a very hard-line view of the world, a very single-minded view of what American interests are. And I think that doesn't allow for a lot of diplomacy. He's a very, very intelligent man. He can be reasoned with on occasion, but he is very rigid, I think, in his view of the outside world, and it does not allow for a lot of compromise in my experience.
And from your personal experience, because when you held that position of assistant secretary, it was under two administrations. Was there a big difference when it was John Bolton in charge and not John Bolton in charge?
Absolutely. He's very much against arms control. He actually thinks that signing arms control agreements it limits the sovereignty of the United States and therefore is probably unconstitutional. I've heard him express that view on more than one occasion. And certainly as far as I was concerned personally, I only served with him for about 6 months. And his main concern was to get rid of me so that he could put someone else in there. But Colin Powell was very supportive. He said, take your time about finding something else. And this used to drive Bolton crazy, frankly. But anyway, I left in June of 2001. And I think as I say, I don't think compromise is much in his constitution.
Daniel Lippman, have views of John Bolton changed whatsoever over the last week since the publicity flurry began around the release of the book?
Well, I think among Republicans, they've really gone down because they used to view Bolton as a real conservative hero who has pursued conservative policies for decades, and now some of them view him as a traitor who put classified information in his book and didn't even get it properly cleared by the Trump administration, which was dragging its feet, admittedly. Among Democrats, I think congressional Democrats, they aren't happy because they think he should have testified. But among regular liberals, they are buying this book in droves. And it's the #1 nonfiction bestseller on Amazon this entire year.
Buying it or downloading it for free? I see there's a PDF circulating.
Yeah, but I think buying it among people who care about following the law, they're buying it or buying the Kindle version or what have you. But because they want to see they want to read the gossip, they want to see what exactly happened. His prose is kind of plotting. It's not an easy read, but it does you feel like you're there as he pursues his job and as he engages in diplomacy and just the inner office battles. And it's amazing that he must have at the end of every day just taken down so many notes because he looks like it reads like someone who went into that job just to write a book, parts of it, because it's just very detailed and not a single detail is left out.
Not a single detail left out. Daniel, when you look at the news now from the United States and this announcement that foreigners would not be granted visas to study or to work in certain jobs until the end of the year, guest workers, be they au pairs or in the IT sector. There's this idea, everybody else around the world is asking, is America closed for business? There's a sense that it's ironic, this is happening the same week that the Bolton book comes out. Two different worldviews of what the United States represents.
Yeah, and I think the Trump administration would say we're in the middle of a pandemic. We don't want to have to screen everyone coming from abroad for whether they have the virus. And also, we have tremendous unemployment here, that record-setting unemployment, and millions of jobs lost, and no prospect for all of them to come back. And so, why don't we try to have Americans and get hired for these jobs before we turn to foreigners? And so I think under a Biden administration, if Biden wins, or even Trump wins, and the pandemic eases, I think we would see this lifted because the business community is very against this. The academia world does not like to prevent foreign students from studying, but I think there's less of a backlash here because many Americans recognize that let's try to get Americans hired back first.
Walid Fares, how much damage will this do to the U.S.'s reputation around the world?
It all depends, first of all, on the American perception of America as it was discussed. And historically, as we know, in past decades, last century, there were instances where immigration was lessened and then back. And at the end of the day, it responds to the need of the American public, of the various sectors of the American public. The business community always wants foreign workers. Academia, as it was mentioned, always wants more students, more budgets, but also the American worker wants jobs. So it all really depends on how this administration is going to move for the comeback of the economy. It's not going to be easy because we are getting out of the pandemic. We still have those riots.
But Waleed, is this a sign that it's the end of the Pax Americana? Because you know full well that all the students who come to America, they come back, they're in a sense sort of mini ambassadors for the United States when they return to their countries. That's not going to happen if they're barred from coming.
My point, Francois, is what is seen as the end of times and new times is not as it is in reality. It is few months to the end of the year until things are settled, because those big choices of completely limiting immigration are not in the hands of the president. It's the whole economic system, social system. So I wouldn't be concerned by a worldview of what America is doing right now in terms of immigration before this becomes legislation. But if it's a measure for economy and then the business community is going to push back, it may change after the elections, though, but not before it.
Avis Bolin, you agree?
Yes, I totally agree. I think there have been these sort of limitations on and off throughout American history. And I think as both Waleed and Daniel mentioned, the business community is very much opposed to these limitations. And it's all very well to say they should hire Americans for them, but often they are hiring foreigners because they haven't people here at home, and the students and the academics. So I think this is a temporary thing. I don't think it really is going to affect the bigger picture over the long term.
Isn't going to affect the bigger picture over the long term. And Avis Bolin, just to conclude, again, if Donald Trump is a one-term president, will the United States go back to the way it was before and the way it sees its role on the world stage?
I don't think totally. I think the Trump administration has marked a watershed for good or for bad. But I think there will certainly be an instinct to repair some of the damage that he's done, to notably repair our relations with our European allies, to try to put our relations with other countries on a more sort of rational basis. Probably there would be a resumption of the Iran deal, which would be hugely important. But at the same time, I don't think anybody can afford to ignore these 4 years of the Trump administration. And I think certainly policymakers will be looking at the big picture and doing reassessment, not necessarily to continue in the Trump direction, but certainly taking a good hard look at our commitments, our troop presence over the world, and it's an opportunity.
Daniel Lippman, one final question for you. The controversy surrounding the Bolton book, it's just one of several in the White House, and it feels like it's been like that since day one, since Donald Trump took over. There's constantly fires and fires put out, new fires started. What can we expect between when you cover this White House, when you go there every day? What can we expect between now and November?
Yeah, you're exactly right. This is a long-running trend. There is a lot of chaos and infighting in the White House, and so this is something we don't know what's going to happen next. There's speculation on the future of the manager of the Trump campaign, Brad Parscale, after the disappointing Tulsa rally, and whether he still has job security. And I think Trump has been told, hey, you should knock off some of your tweeting. You have to kind of act more rationally because you're going to lose otherwise. And he told his campaign advisors, I need to be myself. And so that's kind of an admission that we are going to see those fires continue to have to be burned out.
All right, Daniel Lippman, take your vitamins. It's a lot of time between now and November, and that presidential election. Thank you for joining us from Washington. I want to thank Walid Fares and Ambassador Bolin for being with us as well. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate. Much more on our website, france24.com, on Facebook, Twitter, and our YouTube channel. Bye for now.
As France eases out of lockdown, people are heading back to their old ways of life, except everything feels so unfamiliar.
Well, the places are the same, but whether it's wearing a mask or avoiding a kiss hello, the way we're supposed to navigate everyday life is just different.
What long-term effect is the coronavirus and the almost 2 months in lockdown going to have on France and French society?
Join us for the next episode of French Connections Plus, where we'll take a look at this new normal in France.
French Connections Plus on France 24 and France24.com.
Georgina lives in Mukuru, a slum in Nairobi. Currently, she shares a dry toilet with 4 other families. It may not sound like much, but it's an improvement on before, when she had to go to the toilet in a wooden cabin at the end of this poorly maintained lane.
It was not nice. We were using the dirty sanitation. It was not good. It had germs. Even we were infected. Even you could not allow your son or daughter to use it because it's very dirty.
Disease-ridden toilets are a part of daily life for the billion people worldwide living in slums, a number that the UN says is expected to triple by 2050. The scale of the challenge is immense, but changes are coming, with Georgina and her neighbours benefiting from clean, eco-friendly toilets created by a Kenya-based company.
With container-based sanitation, which is what our toilet is, you don't need to build a sewer line. Yeah. Now you can imagine the process that you have to go through to be able to lay a sewer in a place that is that heavily densely populated. It's virtually impossible.
Another advantage of the dry toilets is the opportunity for recycling. Thanks to these new sanitary facilities, excrement is recycled as organic fertilizer and sold to farmers, with the promise of seeing their yield increase by 30%.
This fertilizer is cheaper than the others and feeds the soil well. The plants grow much faster and above all bear a lot of fruit.
This recycling plant aims to treat 200 tonnes of excrement per day, or 10% of the total produced in the Kenyan capital per year.